Equity work is controversial. I wish that wasn't the case, but I'd be insincere if I were to suggest otherwise. This will look different for each organization, community. Today, I'll try to offer a few pieces of advice when we do run into that inevitable resistance. Today, we talk about external barriers. As will be the norm, let's quickly review last week's theme of internal barriers. All of us have internal barriers, and they are valid, real, and can be difficult, which is why we haven't necessarily taken action yet. By reflecting on our internal barriers, we aim to be transparent and vulnerable, not perfect. We start with the internal because we have more control over working on and resolving those barriers. Of course, we all know external barriers definitely exist as well. There has always been opposition to creating more opportunities and better the livelihoods of the underserved. From women's right to vote to same-sex marriage, rights and liberties are hard fought. I mean, slavery took a civil war to end. Many of these rights we take for granted today. The point I want to assert is that just as people in our past struggled for a better society, we have to as well. There are different ways to view equity. One way is through change management. Essentially, we're saying that we can do better for our communities and therefore must make some changes. Anyone involved in any change management, equity or no, can attest to the challenges. It can be a lot of work to make even minor adjustments. And remember, we're on our fourth theme now. This is 4 more steps than many have taken. What is hopefully now starting to make sense for each of us, what we're starting to internalize and work through, isn't as clear to everyone, whether context, self-responsibility, internal barriers, and now external barriers isn't necessarily common knowledge. If it was obvious, we wouldn't be taking the time to talk about it. I want to emphasize one more time that we really should focus on our internal barriers. These are the barriers that we can start working on today. In the meantime, I will give at least a taste of what is out there to help round out our understanding of all barriers so we can keep it all in mind as we learn the rest of the themes in this guidebook. It would be easier if we were competing with opponents to equity and social justice like it was a fair game, matching our skills and knowledge and our abilities against theirs. It'd be simpler if it was like starting a race where we're all beginning behind the same line. That's unfortunately not how it usually plays out. For the most part, people who disagree with this work rather than compare it to the status quo tend to just deny it altogether. There are variations of this. For some, they believe the current practices, our current times are either good enough or as good as it can be. Some believe that equity is a pipe dream, a fairy tale, that there will always be those on top and those on the bottom, and that by lifting some people up means that others are getting dragged down. Others make arbitrary rules. My personal favorite is that the government shouldn't be involved with the social. Don't worry, we'll have a whole theme based on just that. And of course, a lot of people hold prejudices. Racism, sexism, classism, ageism, and more. Some people believe that certain demographics should have less, should be punished for their differences. If we were to use the metaphor of trying to play a chess match, such opponents will likely not come to play at the table at all, or will just flip the table over so that no one wins. After all, they want things to stay the same, and so it's more strategic for them not to engage us at all. As a start of an answer to this, I really like a quote from Sun Tzu in The Art of War. Yes, it's a bit on the melodramatic side, but work with me here. A victorious army first wins and then seeks battle. A defeated army first battles and then seeks victory. For our purposes, this means before we start trying to lock horns with anyone who has any number of issues or concerns with promoting equity, we should take every step to be in a place to succeed, to try to be as prepared as we can be. If this is your first or one of your first introductions to equity, then my best advice to dealing with the opposition is not to, at least not yet. Work through our internal barriers, keep going through the guidebook, find some small wins, get some allies. If we're going to be in a David and Goliath situation, it's all right to try to beat Goliath and to try to get every strategic and tactical advantage that we can. We may not be there today, but we're going to be. For now, one place we can focus on is the red tape. We're local government bureaucrats, after all. We're on the inside. We can start to figure out where different policies, practices, and programs came from and where they're meant to go. For those aspects of our organizations we start finding have problematic origins and/or inequitable futures, if we're not part of making and changing the rules, then we can find out who is. Take it slow and steady. Get some practice in. Roll with the setbacks, and we'll build our organizational awareness and knowledge. This is what I mean when I talk about being prepared, of getting advantages. It's by doing the hard work, doing the homework ahead of time. Dealing with external barriers is to practice selective patience. We should not be patient for serving our residents as a whole. We can be patient for specific efforts, for particular efforts. Let's do an example. Let's assume we're an HR generalist and we've come across unique situations for our department coworkers. We have a business partner who just isn't into equity and likes to have friendly debates with us on whether it's real or not. Our recruiter tried a year or two ago to change recruitment and got shut down, so doesn't feel that they can try again. The benefits specialist is swamped with changing the healthcare provider for everyone and just doesn't have the time. The HR director seems tentatively open, but is really data-driven in making any big decisions and wants to see a little bit more. The compensation analyst has expressed fears that any equity efforts will reveal disparities in the payroll and they'll be accused of wrongdoing when they're genuinely trying their very best. Finally, let's say there's an internal DEI group that's lost steam because they haven't been provided any means to get their ideas heard by any true decision makers. What can we actually help solve in the short term, the medium term? What's outside our skill set, our resources, our capacity to tackle? Be strategic. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to this, and most likely we'll each have a different ranking of which ones we feel we can best resolve and help, and which ones we have to be selectively patient about. It's like the saying to not just work hard, but work smart. Our optional exercise tries to end on a high note. Just as we can consider what external barriers we face, we can also think about what barriers exist for others that we ourselves don't have to deal with. Just as in the last slide, we try to think of what external barriers were the ones we were most able to work through, we may find there's also opportunities in front of us with no external barriers at all. We can just get it done. And this concludes barriers, both internal and external. Next up, we'll touch base a bit on one of the initially tricky parts of the work, the glossary, and get our heads wrapped around all the different terms.